Vamos, pero sí que me avísame. Ya. Bueno, si quieres, cuando sean 40, sí, cuando sean 40, te digo, la llevas sobre 40 para que mida. Vale.
Потому что первая молекула что-то там дергалась, почему-то разрешила восстановиться. То есть я же говорю, когда
Ну, yo creo que
один из скриптов.
una cosa lleva final de la tabla puede haber alguno de los online. Ya, yo lo miro y si se sí, yo venía. Voy a chitar. Y luego dice, pues tenemos que preparar aquí. Dice, pero mira, vamos a en serio, vamos a poner un tema más punchy, o sea, como necesita la biología, una teoría, cosas así. Sí, ya solo el término es como creo que pensar lo que ya sabes. Bueno, a ver si conseguimos el refuerzo de Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to this, I would say, pretty special seminar that we have the pleasure and privilege of hosting today. So today we have Alvaro Moreno, who is a professor, or he was a professor at the University. You are emeritus professor at the University of the Basque Country, the Department of, I think it's called Logic and Philosophy of Science, correct? So he has been there for many years, for decades. He also had a lot of connections to France, as far as I know. He has been teaching also in France several times. But the main reason for having him here is because since a few years ago, he's also the IPC associate. So we are lucky enough that he also wanted to make some connections between the, let's say, philosophy and science, as the name of his department states. And we are very lucky because we, as the IPC, as you probably know, most of you, we are also very much open and interested in making this kind of links and this kind of creating this kind of bridges between physics and science and other domains of knowledge. So to have Alvaro as part of the IPC community. This is, as I said before, a privilege. And so he's going to present one book that he recently published. It appeared, I think, a few months ago, that he partially wrote in this last year, also in the context of a project that was allocated at the IPC. So thank you very much, Alvaro, for
thank you for
today
for your kind invitation. Very shortly, I'm very happy, and this is at the same time a real challenge to try to present these ideas for this audience. Just in a very short way, as a form of autobiographic presentation. My first interest was mainly in physics, in the philosophy of physics. But then very soon I realized that biology was a very special science. It was at the time when there was the blossoming of molecular biology, and I found that this was in need of explanation, and at the same time there was a very rapid advance and with a new type of explanation. And since then I have had a connection on an interest on biology as a kind of bridge between hard science like physics and very weak, not real science like those called human science, psychology, and so on. So that's why I have worked in biology, because for me it was the opportunity to, so to speak, say things that could be tested, but at the same time going further beyond the limit of the physical science, addressing new questions in between. And this is one of the results, the question of agency. So the outline of my talk will address these questions, basically. So I will introduce my talk by saying a couple of things about a very surprising, in some sense, fact that how in the Earth a very teeny amount of matter, which is living matter, this is a very recent calculation, only 0.1% of the weight of the atmosphere is doing an incredible work, since it's supposed 3 times the flow of energy from Earth's hot interior, which is the responsible of volcanism, plate tectonics, earthquakes, and so on. So it's very powerful. And despite this fact, living matter dominates for its own, in some behalf, for its own interest, so to speak, the climate, the cycles of materials, carbon, nitrogen, water, silicium, and so on, cycling, so driving the geochemical cycles into the so-called geochemical cycles. And this is a kind of power that exerts living matter for its own maintenance. So changing and moderating the geological processes so as to contribute to the sound maintenance, tempering, controlling, and so on. And this way has operating during more than 4 billions of years since the prokaryotic world has colonized, or probably the pre-prokaryotic cells colonized the surface of the Earth. Since then, many changes have occurred. Some of them are well known, are from exterior origin, like changes in the axis of the Earth or meteorites, crashes. But most of the most important changes, like the oxygenization, which kill a lot of forms of life, many massive extinction and so on, are internally generated by the evolution of life itself. So what is behind that? Behind all that, there are innovation of organisms, and there is the action of the different ways of action of the different organisms. Behind all this enormous work, there are myriads of organisms, cells, or big organisms, from teeny bacteria to giant trees, and animals, etc., that are doing things, and with this total amount of things that are correlated, forming ecosystem and so on, they organize all this biosphere. So that's why the way each organism affects its environment in functional ways is the center of this talk. This is what is the concept of agency that I will address more directly here. In the Webster dictionary, they have different definitions, but I have taken the first one. The capacity of a system to exert power. What does it mean to exert power? First of all, the idea that a system exerts power means that there is some form of asymmetry between this system and the environment. But from a physicist, I suppose that the idea is, come on, but what does it exactly mean? Anything have interaction, so they'll have gravitation, electrical forces, and many others. So atoms interact. So what is the difference between the term of action and interaction in general? Well, this is the way I have said that there is an asymmetry. The agent exerts work on its environment. And work is the result of a set of organized constraints harnessing a flow of energy, matter and energy. For example, when a cell, there is flows that traverse the membrane of the cell. This passive transport is a form of interaction. It could be the environment that makes an interaction, for example, in terms of because there is a difference in gradient. But when the cell pumps against gradient, using its internal machinery for doing that, it exerts a work. And this is what I call asymmetry. Because implicitly, by work, and in the design of any man-made machine, is exactly that. Using an organized set of constraints, like a steam machine, where there are a piston, there are the cylinder, there are many constraints that harness the flow of energy, steam, the power of the steam, in a given way. And the given way is useful work. So implicitly, the term work is ordered flow of matter. And then this leads us to the concept of useful. Useful. What is behind this term useful? Implicitly, there is behind this term the idea of goal or function. Since the word goal is something that sounds incomprehensible or incoherent in naturalistic terms, I would prefer to explain the idea of function, which goes to the same point. For example, the heart function is to pump blood. So the useful work of the heart is to achieve this circulation of the blood. This means that the heart exists for what it's doing. So the consequence is that the heart is there for its effects. The color of the flower is there because it has been selected for their function. So that's why the only way to address this idea of useful or goal in a coherent sense is by what I'm telling the term non-trivial causal circularity. I will explain a little bit more that, but through these examples, the work exerted by a system is useful because it results in a contribution to the far from equilibrium maintenance of these systems. And therefore, this work, this action, can be successful or fail. For given a the more simple example that I can imagine, suppose that we have a kind of vesicle. The vesicle is formed by self-assembling, so some initial components, say phospholipid substance. Then suppose that this vesicle or membrane is semi-permeable. So, and there are some reactions inside the vesicle. Suppose, for the sake of the argument, that in this catalytically controlled set of reactions, there are some products that one of the products are the phospholipid substance that construct the membrane or the vesicle. Then this system is doing things, for example, is changing substances, and suppose that for the sake of the argument that some of the transport is favoring by the internal reactions. So I know that is a little bit more complicated, but it's just to keep the basic idea. So this especially self-enclosed, self-assembling set of mutually dependent material structure, enzymes, semi-permeable membranes, catalysts, etc., harness the underlying processes to osmotic transport, for example. Suppose that there are some components inserted in the membrane that act facilitating or not facilitating according to the internal pressure, so as to avoid osmotic burst. Minimally, that this system makes something that contributes to its own maintenance. This is the idea. So living systems use energy to build themselves as far from equilibrium machines, organized sets of constraints, which in turn achieve work. And this is a very elegant idea proposed in 5 years ago, that says, well, how this idea of self-maintaining system could be explained or translated in thermodynamic vocabulary. Work is a constrained release of energy, and instead of the man-made machines, which are used for different things, suppose that are a kind of machines whose work is to construct other constraints so that through very different processes, finally, they construct themselves. This is the logic, a circular logic that I call non-trivial logic, in which what the system, any part of this circular loop is non-stable. It's far from equilibrium. It depends on the effects of this part, and the following part is depending on the input and so on. But finally, there is a global loop. And this is the way, since there is a temporality in which there is coherent to say that something exists, is there because of what is doing in the future. So globally, this is the idea. So what is agency in biology? Basically, this is translated in what organisms are. Organisms function with a circular logic. They have a precarious in the sense that they need to do things. They are far from equilibrium, dissipative systems that are continuously exchanging matter and energy substance for their own maintenance. If they don't do that, they decay, and they will lose their organization. And they do and must do actions. Look for food, avoid predators, ensure reproductive continuity, etc., etc. Because, ultimately, because their constitutive organization, so how they are made, their metabolism basically, is a precarious, far from equilibrium set of machines, molecular machines, and enzymes, and a lot of very complicated structures in need of functional interaction with this environment, which of course include other organisms, mainly. And I will illustrate this by the case of the bacterial chemotaxis. The bacterial chemotaxis is every cell more or less exemplifies this type of relation. The cell detects some relevant for its own maintenance features on the environment. For example, Escherichia coli bacteria are for them are relevant, say, antibiotic, the presence of antibiotic to avoid, or the presence of sugar. If their metabolism is low in energy and in the environment there is detected a gradient of sugar, the bacterium activates the movement of the flagellum so as to go in the direction of increasing concentration of sugar till the metabolism has recovered its homeostatic condition. So that's what I call the constitution action causal loop. So because the action is triggered by the internal machinery. The internal machinery depends on the metabolism. But the metabolism ultimately at a different time span is not maintaining without getting food or avoiding a harmful substance like the antibiotic. Actually, there are other living entity, a kind of fungus. So this is the basic idea. Now I will go to the second point, which is the relationship between agency and evolution. And of course, life changes, and agency has also changed in different ways in different organisms. Of course, there is no direction in the evolution. So many changes are not viable. Others are viable in certain circumstances, but not in others. So life is exploring what is viability in every direction, in all the possible directions, including, in some cases, complexification. Yet, sometimes, and I will focus on this point, there are radical innovations. And these radical innovations have opened up new evolutionary directions. And so when radical innovation happens, this allows that these organisms that succeed in this innovation access to new niches. So, for example, the way of life of an eukaryotic cell has nothing to do, does not compete directly for the same resources, the same way of life as prokaryotic cells. The way of life of a multicellular animal has nothing to do with a cell. So, for example, an animal with eyes, the type of interaction is completely unexplored and novel kind of niche or way of life. So, to have an idea, this the first, the origin of the Earth, there are approximately 400 years, millions of years without life. And it is thought that the first prokaryotic cells have appeared about 4 billion years ago. And the first oxygenic event was when the cyanobacteria appeared, and this has killed practically 90% of the forms of life which were living in anoxic conditions. This great event has to do and a lot with the expansion and diversification of the transition of the appearance of the eukaryotic cells, which is the first point in which I will focus. Then approximately simple multicellularity are those forms of non-obligate, non-stable forms of multicellular organization. And then finally, around 700 millions of years ago, appeared the first obligated organismic forms of multicellularity. And I will focus in the case of animals. So, which is my main argument here for relating agency and evolution? Since every time a new organism appears and its internal organization involves innovation in its capacity for action, either this new capacity becomes functional in exploring a new niche. This new organization permits me, the cell, to do new things which appear to be functional for me, and then the result is I can reproduce and I can keep this form of organization or not, and then I disappear. So this is my basic argument. That's why innovations in agency can significantly influence the evolutionary trajectory or the lineage. What each type of organism does is therefore a relevant explanatory factor in the evolution of each lineage. Because what an organism does may contribute to its, and for definition, either contributes to their maintenance and reproduction, or otherwise will disappear. So we will see next how and why the complexification of agency is an explanatory factor in these two main evolutionary transitions. Well, since time is going faster, the origin of eukaryotic cells was around, the total transition was 1,000 million years. And it begins with a single archaea, which is a prokaryotic, there are bacterium or archaea, called Asgard, as recent data. How was this process? Let's have, first of all, just to compare the size of a eukaryotic cell is 10,000 the volume average of a prokaryotic cell. There are a lot of complexities in a full-fledged eukaryotic cell. How was, according to the more recent data, this transition? Well, there are different processes, but I will focus on the question of interest me, which is the question of the action, the interaction. In a given moment, you can see that there are some bacterium, and this is the gray is the archaea, the host. This archaea, in a given moment, has evolved and has transformed the cytoskeleton and invented some innovations, basically a more dynamical cytoskeleton. And since there was a stage in which there was a kind of symbiotic relation between some type of bacterium with this archaea, but in the exterior, this is very important, not inside yet. In a given moment, this type of archaea were able to phagocytic activity. That means that they are something that are very usual in eukaryotic cells. For example, the eukaryotic cell of our immune system are combating the infection by phagocyting the infecting cells. So what is phagocytosis? Phagocytosis is a movement in which the dynamic cytoskeleton, which is a kind of conservative structure, but very, very dynamic and pushed by and changing the form by the motors, the protein motors like myosin, dynein, and kinesin, change the conformation of the cell, entrap the prey, and digest the prey. But the event was that in a given moment, since these bacteria were phagocyted, but since they were already symbiotic, they were not killed. So there was an event, probably in many events, they were killed. But in a given moment, they survived inside and became the mitochondrion, which is a very important and late stage in the origin of eukaryotic cell, because this the mitochondrial innovation was the energetic machinery, and allows, for example, for all the radiation and the probably a very important role in a oxygenic atmosphere and so on. So this the rapid diversification of the eukaryotic cells and the remarkable organization and behavioral innovations, which has advanced movement, sensory organ development, and many, many others I have no time for explaining, facilitated a radiation and an extraordinary diversification. This is a recent tree of life of the eukaryotic world. Realize that there are different colors. Look at the left side. The left side, just for resuming, this at the left more side, there are those that have on the origin that are in the origin of plants and algae. On the right side, there is the Opisthoconta, which are those that are called Opimoda. Optimoda, no, this is a typo. So green are the Diphoda and blue Opimoda. Which are the main difference? The first great split in the evolution of eukaryotic cell was within these supergroups. Most of the Diphoda, the green ones, have adapted to autotrophic forms of life, losing more or less at the end completely in some cases, their motil capacities, developing mainly, but not only, photosynthetic capacities. On the other hand, Opimoda are characterized by predominantly heterotrophic lifestyles, probably a consequence of some initial organizational specificity that have favored this adaptive data of success in heterotrophic modes of life. And within this Opimoda, we find several groups possessing very interesting and sophisticated capacities. In particular, the group of Holozoan protists. Let me come back to these Holozoa, which are the Opisthocomta mainly have two are unique flagellum. This is where the word comes, and there are two branches. One that have evolved in fungi and adopted a heterotrophic but sessile form of life, and has lost their flagellum, and most of them, except for the reproduction, and have wall cell. The cell have wall. And the other one, the Holozoa, includes unicellular eukaryotic and also the animals. Okay, so this Holozoan experience are a very rapid acceleration in the acquisition of novel genetic toolkit shared with animals. For example, genes involved in cell-to-cell communication, in cell-to-matrix adhesion, in cell signaling, in transcriptional regulation, temporal cell differentiation, for example, dead cell, etc. These unicellular systems were very complex, that have multicellular some life stage, and they are able to display a wide range of complex and diverse predatory behaviors. Very shortly, sophisticated ways of feeding, capture big preys, switch between flagellated and amoeboid states, collective strategies for predating, and so on. So, the selective success of these behaviors have probably favored this Holozoan innovation and prepared the transition towards an irreversible multicellular stage. So these are the ancestors of all the animals. That is, the multicellular Holozoa are called animals or metazoa. Likely, the transition to animals was a messy set of different evolutionary paths where only successful stages, only those that were able to provide form of interaction that were useful for the maintenance of this new organization were retained. And that's why these innovations were those that finally evolved towards the early animals that have been disappeared now. For example, one thing is that the early metazoans are probably very, very teeny and multicellular animals living in the soil of the seas or the fresh water that were active, displaying active feeding behavior. But this was very important for their evolution because gastrulated structures that are the formation of the machinery for feeding and digesting this substance was selected during this form of interaction, then leading to the first form of animals. In fact, multicellularity has appeared in different ways, in different forms, and many, at least more than 30 times in the history of life. Plants and algae have evolved from diphoda photosynthetic cells. For example, fungi have evolved for Opisthoconta that have lost their flagellum and have lost motility and have maintained a cell wall. All of these forms are completely different multicellular organization, and only animals have a way of life, a multicellular way of life, capable of motility and flexible, rapid, and complex forms of motility. Let me give several examples of different types of multicellular organization. One is the dictyostelium, which these authors, Nicholas, what is the name of the authors? Nicholas and Newman, 2020. They call passive liquid-like multicellular form. By liquid-like mean they call a very flexible and motile, very, very dynamic way of organizing the structure among the cells. Metazoans are active liquid-like multicellular form, directly linked motile cells, and I will focus on this. The case of non-metazoan holozoan, the other unicellular holozoan, have a form that they call solid multicellular form. For example, a kind of system in which there are many nucleus within the same membrane. In the case of the plants, which they call active cellular solid, because they are based in wall and the cell cannot move. So what is the specificity of animal multicellularity? Radically different from that of plants, algae, and fungi. Difference in the type of cell compartment. Only animals have cells that have not wall. The wall plays a very important role in immunity, in protection, in giving support, etc. But at the same time, is incompatible with flexible motility. Difference in the type of intercellular control. For example, metazoan animal have channels of voltage gate channel that control and allow fine-tune control between or among interactions, in cell-cell interaction, and also coordinating precise subcellular organization with complex cellular function. This is fundamental, for example, in the case of neurons and in the case of for the nervous system. Also, there are differences in the type of intercellular organization because the material properties. I will very shortly explain that. General contractility, the ability to coordinate and integrate actomyosin assembly. What is actomyosin assembly? I have mentioned that the cytoskeleton of all the eukaryotic cell is a kind of flexible matrix or structure that changes. Well, the animal cells are connected by cables of actomyosin that allows them to form contractile assemblies and then forming tissues. They are very contractile. And this allows that at the same time, the body is formed, is built, this is the call morphogenesis, through controlling all this process, the movement, at the same time controlling the number of cells, controlling with cells that phagocyte, that there is also protection, immunity, etc. There have been a lot of coordination and showing homeostasis, etc. At the same time, keeping the global contractility and also allowing behavior, reversible behavior, because the development is irreversible, but movement is controlled by reversible mechanism. A modern animal contractile cell span a continuum between unspecialized contractile epithelia and specialized muscle tissues. Well, this body plan allows a big bang. Was preparing for in a given moment, very soon, some cells evolved because they have already the genetic toolkit and become old ancient neurons and expanded all along the body, coupled with primitive with the muscles, the viscera, etc., and integrating external information, but also controlling developmental, immune, and homeostatic functioning. Not only controlling in a very precise terms the formation and the action, but also was very soon recruited for controlling the development, for controlling the normal physiological and immune activity of the body. And which were the consequences of that? A qualitative change in the complexity of the body linked to the complexity of agency, especially in the bilateria, branch, because in the bilateria, which was a very important difference in the branches of the evolution of animals, in which there are instead of a symmetrical symmetry, a radial symmetry, bilateral symmetry. And then appeared the brains and in an increasing concentration of an integrative center, which is what we call the brain. And once this process, I have no time for explaining the bottlenecks in which body plans allow more encephalization and others that preclude, etc. But finally, the result is that this fine-tuned brain nervous system control of the metazoan body led to the appearance of a new form of biological organism, qualitatively much more complex and integrated body than any other form of multicellularity. Because the nervous system and the brain can allow so many number of configurations and an incredible and non-unparalleled capacity to integrate information that this allows a kind of body that has an incredibly degree of complexity if the body plan allows this possibility to be realized. And these evolution occur hand in hand with the progressive appearance of qualitatively more complex form of agency. In a given moment, cognitive, conscious, and rational agency. This, of course, I have no time for discussing, but the idea is that all this structure is what allow, and only in this type of body, it was possible, this evolution. So, concluding, the history of life is marked by innovation events from the origin of life, eukaryotic, multicellular organisms, to mammals and humans. Innovation have occurred many times, but some of these were very radical, and my thesis, what I have tried to explain, and is of course much more detailed in the book, is how the role of the appearance of linked to these innovations or new forms of agency have pushed and make a kind of feedback between the agency and the innovation, and that's why only in some branches the complexification has go further, and whereas in others has just attained a ceiling. So thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much, Alvaro, for this wonderful combination of philosophy and biology for an audience made mostly of physicists and chemists. So if there's anyone online that wants to make a question, please write that in the chat, and I will read that to Alvaro. But please, time is open for questions, if any. Yes, Daniel.
So for what I understood, I can connect an agency with a system being far from equilibrium. Is it possible to quantify this with a number in the history of the evolution of the cells? So can I say that there were times in the evolution of the cells where there were systems more far from equilibrium and the agency was pushing the system more and more, or this makes no sense?
To be more or less far from equilibrium, I don't know exactly how to measure that. Well, I would say that there are stages in some forms of life, for example, sport, that can endure for many millions, thousands of years, practically in equilibrium or as stable, maintaining their organization. But sooner or later, they have to recover their metabolism or will disappear. The whole system works at a very, very different time and spatial scales. The biosphere, the ecosystem, is a global machinery that is working far from equilibrium. Each cell in each organism is working far from equilibrium. The whole physiology of the multicellular body is working far from equilibrium. In certain circumstances, they are spending much more energy, or they are, for example, working faster and probably, in that sense, being more far from equilibrium. There is also another concept which is not exactly the same, which is close or less to the condition of viability. For example, a system is going close to the viability conditions if it's losing homeostasis and is going far from the homeostatic condition and it's going too far. It could be destroyed unless there is some compensation. We are always going away from our homeostatic conditions, but there are continuously triggering mechanisms for recovering the homeostasis. But homeostasis is working always far from equilibrium. So I don't know if I have answered your question.
Yes.
Thanks for the talk. So the definition of agency was basically a thermodynamic one. And I was wondering, does it also apply to non-living systems? So are there prebiotic systems to which you would assign agency? And then are there post-biotic, like cities or states or the whole biosphere, that one would assign agency according to this definition?
Yes. For sure, the life has not a one-shot event. So it took stages, and there were protocells. These protocells have existed in far from equilibrium conditions and appearing and disappearing for myriads. In a given moment, they took a kind of intergenerational continuity, because some of them were capable in a given moment to reproduce with some minimal form of reliability, and then innovations were kept. This allow in a given moment that some of them become more complex, and some of them also formed food webs. The waste of ones being inputs or feed for others, and forming a kind of proto-ecosystem or proto-ecological webs, because otherwise it's impossible that the system will perdure. So there are conditions, organizational conditions at the level of organisms, like acquiring genetic records or something like that for ensuring and the continuity of the stability in the organization, but there are also required in prebiotic transition that those systems organize environmental conditions, so began to manage their environment so as to ensure continuity, and not just when the inputs or the resources were finished, they just disappear. So they have to learn to organize limited, localized food webs and ecological or proto-ecological organizations. So probably all that was gradual. Or probably no. It's the only rational way to conceive how it has happened. And all of that was far from equilibrium. But they require also mechanisms to ensure that this increasingly more complex form of far from equilibrium was at the same time robust enough, because it becomes, when there are more pieces, they become more complicated, probably become more fragile. So for example, the invention of regulatory constraints, all that was very important. The invention of different scale times for ensuring all the stability of the system. So life is not only organisms. Life is organisms building ecosystems, building evolutionary systems, etc. So life is a system that works at different temporal and spatial scales. And this makes the system globally robust.
But if I may, the question was whether non-living systems, either at the origins, like you're addressing, or some other.
Or some others, hurricanes.
Can become agents. So
agents.
From a thermodynamic definition. So you give a thermodynamic definition of agency.
Yeah.
Is from physics, right?
Yeah.
And then you're applying to biology. But the question, if I understood it correctly, is whether systems in between that you cannot really.
I think that the people working in synthetic biology, working in the lab, trying to work to build in the lab type of vesicles that that mimic some prebiotic systems, will achieve realistically systems that work in far from equilibrium conditions. There are people here like Kepa that are much more familiar with the details of this type of research. But of course, this should be produced, because in a given moment, there's a transition from physics and chemistry to living system. But at the beginning, we cannot speak in terms of living systems. But far from equilibrium, complex, very complex proto-organisms or proto-cells, rather proto-cells.
Sorry, there was another question there. And then you.
Which is the most recent known example of feedback between agency and evolution?
Sorry?
So which would be the latest known example of feedback between agency and evolution in animals?
In animals.
In animals or multicellular organisms?
No, a multicellular organism, well, first of all, any organism is an agent. Now, the specificity of animals that are multiple agents and very flexible and complicated agents. So plants and fungi are, and algae, and some algae are agents because they are capable to, for example, eject substances or chemicals in certain circumstances, etc. So they can react and they do things. They're, of course, to survive and to reproduce. Now, the difference is qualitative in terms of the complexity of what the animals are able to do. Now, if your question is which are the... Now, the thing is that the qualitative difference between what a multicellular plant or a multicellular fungi is able to do with respect to a unicellular is not so big. Instead, in the case of an animal, the change is impressive. Just think in the eyes. So just managing or interacting in a world through the vision or flying. This is a qualitative change. And this could only happen in animals. So your question is, which is the more ancient, extant type of animal? There are Placozoa and spongy.
So my question was more related, like, if you take a look to the history of evolution, what is the latest point that you can connect to the feedback between agency and...
Yeah, I have two examples because I have no time for developing how the first form of agency has to do with the origin of prokaryotic cell, for lack of time. But in all these processes, there is a phenomenon in which there is some innovation in the organization of, say, a protocell. For example, the capacity to interact with environment and to exchange information, for example, with other protocells and form, say, a kind of association. We know that the oldest form of life appears in stromatolites, forming a kind of colonies. And this requires a control of the interaction in substances, synchronizing metabolism and so on, forming a collective matrix and so on. That could be an example of how the early forms of agency that have appeared have been recruited for reinforcing the evolution. Then I have developed the role of the appearance of agency in the transition between prokaryotic and eukaryotic life. Then I have focused in the case of the origin of animal. I have no time for discussing all the examples that are in the book, which, by the way, is open access.
It's open access, and
there are many very interesting details.
It's open access, and there's also volume here in the library of the IPC.
Yeah.
So at least one, I think more than one. Pablo.
Okay, thank you for the talk. I found it extremely interesting. I was wondering if you can speculate about the role of agency and this circular mechanism that you described in not for the for analyzing the history of life, but rather of the present and future, in particular in connection to two things. Now, first, the emergence of culture and the changing the behavior of humans, not based on biology, but on culture, in some sense, not based on genes. And the second thing is potentially on the creation of machines that exceed the capacities of humans. So moving forward, these concepts that you describe, how do they connect with that?
Well, this is not a field of my expertise, and so I cannot tell things very, very interesting, except in what concerns something that you have not mentioned, which is the impact in the biosphere. One of the things that since the appearance of living Homo sapiens especially, the specificity of human rational agents are not so much changing in our hardware, so to speak, but in our capacity to fabricate tools. And through these tools, we are modifying our interaction with the environment. So, for example, a species change the interaction with the environment by developing, say, new appendices, new wings, or new sensors. We are not doing that. We are inventing microscopes, we are inventing telescopes, we are inventing machines that enlarge our muscles, allowing us to translate each other. We modify living species through the agriculture since thousands of years ago. We modify animals. We modify, we eliminate wolves by for cultivation, for agricultural uses, and we are increasingly in a increasingly fast way modifying the biosphere. Biosphere has been self-modifying, but recovering always, maintaining homeostasis. Now we are in risk of losing that. In fact, we are losing that. And the action of the present day action is, I have now the record, but is becoming the third part of the total power of the whole biosphere. Man-made machines are increasingly impacting in the biosphere. The biosphere has so far expanded biomass and increasing biodiversity and equilibrium, global homeostasis. Now, since especially the Industrial Revolution, our impact is in the opposite direction, diminishing rapidly biodiversity and destroying homeostasis. We have to think very carefully of how can we change this trend, because otherwise we will disappear and we will make a disaster that has not been precedent in the evolution of the biosphere. This is my main point.
Okay. Sounds great.
So the agency, the last form of developed complexity of the agency, which are human-made machines and etc. Just the case of AI is consuming an incredible amount of energy. It's consuming a lot of very hard to find materials, etc. So we are in risk. Yeah.
But if I may add a bit on that, in terms of to what extent can artificial intelligence be considered an agent in itself? Maybe part of the question was also. No, all right.
Just a speculation.
No, I think that the key question is to kind of generate, like, both in the cases with more biological or more hardware that he was referring to, you generate the interface. You are able to modulate and construct the interface of interaction to create that asymmetry between system and environment, right? That kind of foundational asymmetry. In the case of tools and technology, you also change the interface but more at a cognitive level, kind of like how we interact with the world, how we can, understand better the world and transform. And in the case of artificial intelligence, I think we should start getting worried when the systems that are created change the interface. So, like, as long as the interface is fixed. But if you feel that the interface is changing, then you should start worrying.
Is this not a signature that the AI itself is an agency because it's modifying the environment for its survival?
Yeah, but survival. Yeah.
By the way, I have forget to mention that synthetic biology is also a kind of probably a way we are intervening that will be very, very important and will change ourselves biologically. And this is also for the first time that we will do some such deep that will change also the evolution in another sense, so to speak, internally and ecologically.
I think I also understood this question, in terms of agency, like a very powerful concept, right? I mean, that it can be applied to many different systems, and it's a multi-scale concept, right? Because you may apply that to biology, but to many other systems, because far from making systems, you can find them in many different contexts, not only in biology.
I was thinking that also in culture, we have something similar, these critical innovation events that change everything. It's same as in biology, we have it in culture, in science, I think very similar behavior.
And you may apply this concept of agency, but you have to define also the function, right? So it's a
Historically, the
function
concept of agency has been discussed for more than 2,000 years since the Greek philosophy as a question related with human action. So how our beliefs, etc., how we consciously do things. But was made absolutely in contrast with that happens outside we human beings. My attempt was just to bridge between, so to speak, starting from the physical chemical world to say how these have been originated, how has been more complex until arriving what is familiar, which is our human agency.
So I'm very glad that this hour of talk and discussion, it helped, let's say, to contribute to these 2,000 years of history of the concept of agency. But I'm afraid we have to finish the seminar here. So thank you very much again, Alvaro. So you are always very welcome. So we may find in the future, another opportunity to invite you again and promote a discussion like the one of
Thank you to you for making it.
Ricardo, unas gradas gigantescas.
Entonces la pregunta de la última vez que te di es, ¿está el sitio bajo cojonudo piso que te compraste en el
Sí,
antiguo?
acabo de
Es que me acuerdo que me contaste que te acabas de comprar un
A ver cuándo vienes. Sí, un día quedamos.
¿Vives aquí?
Ahora, por ejemplo, en febrero voy a estar mucho, porque tengo muchas clases de máster, entonces voy a quedarme bastante. Depende del... Es que el mío también me gusta. Entonces, cuando viene yo a Verónica... No estoy ahí en la sombra, nunca he sido... Pero les gusta que esté por allí también. Y entonces... Barcelona, los dos, haciendo medicina.
Ostras, una sobrina que acaba la cesanía. No, mañana se
Al final, me ha provocado.
Barcelona, la autónoma.
Están en esa carrera. Los dos han metido, he dicho, alguno que haga geografía para cuidarme un poco.
Claro.
Bueno, ¿qué de tu vida?
Pues nada, aquí estoy de visita.
De visita, también ya retire. No, retire.
No, pero yo no creo que llegue a tanto como de mérito.
Oye, pues te dan 1.000 euros, o sea, hasta...
Pero no por la pasta.
Nos dedicamos a la ciencia no fue por la pasta.
Yo no lo sé, pero...
Si aguantas a los 70 años...
Estoy dándole vueltas. Yo no tengo ni las fechas ni las condiciones.
Bueno, me gusta que yo hago las cosas que ahora estoy por hobby, O sea, no...
Ya.
Estoy luchando para que me suban.
Hay algunos condiciones
Ya, sí.
y todavía que no me...
Se supone que no
me gusta mucho cómo funciona el Parlamento y para mí
Bueno, es que eso, mira qué cosa.
mantenerme en investigación.
Uf, qué libertad.
van a abrir
Todo dentro de su...
No,
Pero es que
no,
te sonríe la vida.
No, me cargo. Y luego tuve lo de. No, la grande que no me tuve lo de la gran de la.
No es lo que quieres.
Porque
No,
¿qué pasa? Corazón.
Templeton, y justo cuando nos acababa la Templeton.
No, pues no sé, o sea, es así,
Sí, John Templeton.
Esas son las fiestas de los hombres.
Y me suena eso, y ni me suenan muchísimos palabras que has utilizado.
Como mi padre que no conocía el mundo. Esto, si no conocía el barrio donde había
Cosas humanas, montones de cosas.
¿Qué ha pasado?
Y de un
Pues
número, tenía un proyecto de no sé qué, líneas sobre el purpose.
Pues ahora estás entre
Horse Institution. Horse Institution, no venía. Luego, siempre le damos caso. Yo voy a tener que traer basura. Y entonces me dejo Pedro. Pero Miguel, pero le lleva tengo también sí, ya conocer a la Foundation, basculo un poco y más a lo que publicas y tal, para el currículum y oye, pues gracias a eso, te llevan las cuentas, ¿no? Muy bien, nada, pues estuve pues, con Kepa, con este chico, con Leo, y tenemos un pequeño equipo. Nada.
Igual hace 5 años que estuvimos ahí con el danés, que luego fuimos. Sí,
contigo.
Sí, que
te endiñaron aquí la.
Sí, que no podía Ricardo, y que luego fuimos a comer aquí al lado.
Sí,
joder, que yo estaba hecho polvo, porque de repente me llevaba mi mujer diciendo, oye, que has dado positivo de COVID y tal. Me empecé a sentir fatal y no fui a comer con él.
Con Rasmussen, eso es otra cosa.
Esa es otra cosa.
Esa es otra cosa. ¿No te acuerdas que un día estuvimos? Fuimos de esa de caña.
Sí. Bueno, pues ya estaremos en otro.
Sí. Yo también os voy a dejar.
Yo también. Todos vamos a decir, vamos para afuera.
Voy a coger mi.
No, gracias. Tengo
¿Cuándo se inaugura
una buena fundación? Sí, está viva.
Mañana lunes.
Estuve con Ricardo
también.
Y
en teoría es que el nos lo encargamos a sacar la vaca, final de yo tardar una semana más, a partir de febrero, y luego pues fijarlo, esa actividad, mayo, abril, mayo. El otro día filosofía.
Me ha gustado más esta Álvaro de Targa. Sí, responde lo que quiere. Ya le doy eso.
así me gusta esto que.
Gracias.
Que me ha gustado más la de hoy que la del otro día en filosofía.
Ya, bueno, pues mira.
Será también porque soy físico. Entonces, como se hace
Y orina también tengo que llevar, ¿no? Vale, sí, perfecto. Gracias. Diego, para la fecha, no sé por qué tengo que coger el topo. Y en teoría, claro, me dijo que tenía distintas horas, ¿sabes? De que yo no tendría que estar aquí a las 8, ¿sabes? Tendría que venir un poco más tarde y salir más tarde, ¿sí? ¿Sabes? Bueno, yo voy a llamar al fondo, no puedo decir mañana. ¿Y qué me dice todo? Claro, yo por venir puedo venir, pero el problema es lo que yo te digo. Yo aquí, claro, ya, no, lo voy con vos. No, no voy a usar. Pero para no se cuenta porque yo esto era Carolina, hay más fallado, ¿eh? Oye, que bajó y yo tenía por eso. No te preocupes. Gracias. 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 No. Ah, lunes. Vale. Mira, Carlos, me acaban de llamar y notificarnos ya que mañana tengo que ir a las 8:50 hacerme el análisis allí porque no era en el ambulatorio, era en análisis hospitalario especial y tal. Y yo tengo que ir mañana a las 8:50. Y entonces puede venir, pues, esta chica tendrá que venir a las 8. Y que sea hasta las 9:30 que venga bien. Y total, ya se va a hacer café y esto, y a las 11 ya dejamos los dos más partes y empieza a recoger pares que luego esperamos. Ya lo siento, me han llamado al neurólogo, ha sido un error mío porque por antes poner vale, vale. Vale, venga, por favor. Buena idea, el único tipo de tiene no tiene distintos exteriores, porque la taquilla de ancha es doble, es verdad, es doble. O sea, tiene dos puertas, es una taquilla que son dos taquillas. Le mandan un ministro a activar. Gracias. Todo. Que la tarde que llama. Ok, bueno, vale, y esto escucharé que me queda aquí en la mitad de la tele. Porque aquí, como aquí se me ponga contar el empleado. Otra empleado, buscamos. Y lo vaya a punto. Y es que yo, bueno, la que encontrar, sí, que la conclusión esa, ¿cómo se va? DNI que significa. DNI significa la teoría que es la ciencia. Sí, claro, el pasado del hola, hola, ¿qué quería? Sí, señor. ¿Qué quería? ¿Ha quedado bien? Sí. Ahora, que lo explicaron, listo, ¿vale? Sí, perfectamente. Pues ahora le digo, si usted no puede, porque yo tengo un poquito, para una nómina individual. Necesito para poder fichar. Para que hay que fichar de la sala. Es importante el claro, como pero hay un número de teléfono, por ejemplo, aquí, por servicio, opciones, vamos a esto de control, el operativo, el móvil. Creo que en uno de ellos se coge una chica y te apunta. Nosotros como la fecha, yo tengo un número asignado hacia el año. Sí, yo creo que número. Sé que la gente nueva, ese número no te lo asignan. Ya. Sí, la verdad sí. Entonces, la gente que viene, que es nueva, como tú, que viene un chico, que llama un número. Carly, prueba, una cosa. Esa chica necesita tener la taquilla de la lanza. La taquilla de la lanza es doble y una de las dos taquillas es para mí. Entonces, a ver, yo le he encargado porque sea la chica por favor de toda la porque punto. Y eso tengo que para que lo pueda, por favor. Entonces, no digo mañana. Este canal me va a coger para la de señor.
Llegó de ahí ya.
Si no, que pongo el faro y la llave que se ha perdido esa llave. La tiene la hacha. Pero bueno, sí, entonces, antes es posible una disculpa que lo llamaban a tiempo. Sí, pero a mí me lleva a lo que yo no puedo. Ahí es un no, para entrar aquí, no. Yo creo que no pero estaba en la oficina, una lista de fui capaz de encontrar claro, por ahí es eso. De ahí se volvieron a crear el enlace. Vale, perdón. Un sitio de control, para el control, y un sitio de control es el oye, veré con el gallo, a ver cómo vamos a ver esto. Código, vamos a estudiar más de pero llegué, de momento que estaba con una muy llamada, entonces no te pide cobrar algo perfecto, pero no sí que ¿Por qué me llamas a X? Entonces, para no abrir la de ella, teléfono A, para no abrir la de ella, claro, y preguntarle cuál es la que estaba aquí. No está aquí y quiero un teléfono. Que sí, pues interaccionamos. Sí, claro, conmigo. No, faltaría más. No, y aún así, que tal te ha perdido algo y no lo abrimos por error, y creo que aquí, o sea. Sí, bueno, que lo hagamos, pues. Pero es algo así de. No, pero no es por una primera. ¿Qué te ayuda? No me tengo una lista, pero quisiera. No sé si me va a identificar. No hay gente, como quiera, si quieres ser evidente, no hay gente. No, para aquí pegamos peor imagen. Bueno, no haces nada porque vas a tener que comer aquí. ¿Por qué? Porque va a venir la masa, no te vas a dar cuenta y te vas a dar aquí el paciente y tienes que estar aquí. Vas a tener el genes y necesitas fija, ¿verdad? No, acá está bien. Y luego todo. No. Tú que te traes bocadillos y Andrea que te traes. Yo me traigo una princesa, pues. Por eso, y tengo un bocata que me iba a traer por el sentimiento. Porque no te lo que yo lo hago para que algo que lo no sea. Hoy lo hago. A base de esto me hago. Muy bien. Muy bien. Muchas gracias. Vamos a quitar y vamos a ver. Sobre tanto tiempo, no lo veis que después no estamos, no lo tenemos. Claro, permita que a la persona va. Mañana van a abierto los despachos ya y todo, que antes de irse, ¿no? Sí. Está todo vamos por aquí. A la compañía intentando el café con un martillo. Pues mañana a las 8:30 y lo primero que tienes que hacer es las puertas a la mitad de la mañana. Periodista, puerta abierta, puertas abiertas. Abres las cortinas. Listo, pues ya ahora preparamos una café. Claro, no, ya sabes que hablamos de utilizar el café. Pero tenemos lo ese colocarlo, ¿eh? Porque lo real y que van a mantenimiento o que se. Al final no puedo hablar, no puedo. Perdona, no yo. No, una vez yo, a ver sacar lo que muy bien. Sí. Ahora no nuestro papá. Yo tampoco fui capaz, ni la primera ni la segunda. La segunda, fue sacar lo que no hablaba, pero nunca aparece. Sí, no te preocupes porque es. A lo mejor hace chiripa, creo. Hasta la más pista. Bueno, quería aprender esto. Unos humanos y unos humanos. Ya vamos a hacer. Hoy es. ¿Tú después? No, yo el domingo. ¿Hoy de mañana? Sí, bueno, perdón, mañana. Sí, no, pero digo, otro día que vengas. Ya está, todo. ¿Sí? Pues a la oficina y consultarle. ¿Sabes que en la hoja esta? Es más, he puesto aquí. Mira, control, yo creo que llamamos a control. Mira, a la TIC, ¿ves? Manera. ¿Pero qué es que no? A la TIC. De todas maneras, lo que me gusta. Aquí lo estamos como lo ves. Yo aquí todo lo una pasada. Ah, vale, pues ya sacamos. Ricardo, aquí yo creo que por lo menos. No, pero yo vendré a las 3:30. Vete más tarde que tengo más. Ahora ya. A ver, así, no, tenemos un ruido. Ah, perdón, sí, como ponía la dirección ahí, dos sonidos sin querer. Nada, después de la tuya, venga, muy. Yo llego por la mañana, claro. Vale. El contenedor de papel que está ahí dentro, lo enseño, lo sacamos ahí fuera, ¿vale? Normalmente hay que lo demás, pero una vez que piensa, eso lo pasamos a pie. No lo aviso. Oído que estás, pues. Sí, como aquí, porque yo les había enseñado por eso. Si no estás aquí, no te das mirar ahí. Y si no lo ves, oye, aparte de sillas, aparte de eso, yo he visto que los a la gente, pero no pasa bien. ¿Y no será el bocadillo de total? Pues, chica, aquí poco. Pero ya aquí me puede, porque hay un poco de tiempo. Así estamos todos, ¿no? La Cataluña, ¿cuántas horas tienes que hacer? ¿Cuántas horas tienes que hacer? No, no. Es así. Hay que lograr el tema. Es que no llega a una manera de la fácil. Pero la vida es así, ¿no? ¿No? Pero el chico también, ¿en serio? Yo también, todo lo mismo. Y yo soy lo mismo. Para entenderlo a otra persona. Sobre todo que estamos transmitiendo ese día, porque el tema de día. Claro, pues estoy sufriendo la representar. Que si ahora chape 180 horas al mes, estáis repartiendo entre los tres. Exactamente. Pero más lo que estamos haciendo yo y yo, ¿por qué? Porque Diego, cuando nos encontramos aquí, esa desconta. Claro, pues. Pero tenés más desconta porque yo tengo problemas con la empresa. Que no les pagan, que no se quedan de cuánto, que necesitan por la dotación de Italia, que incluye el bar. Eso es todo. Y este hombre que más la participación es el más mayor, ¿no? Entiendo. Además, jóvenes. Bueno, pero usted es un cuenta. Yo soy 54 y yo tengo 47, 47 para el hombre. Claro, más mayores son 100. Sí, no es más joven. Yo te he hecho una abuelita, no es que no. Vale. No veas. Y yo he estado, no sabes si te hace pasar un camino, ¿no? Por lo que más caro. Y quédate la de sí. Entonces tenemos un número de uso. En la elección, arreglado. Ahora no nada, nunca me nada. Y este año pasado, de a otros sitios, y así me traen los lugares. Es la diferencia de clima, y al final de dejarlo como que para mí vaya la tensión que la familia de tensión mágica, algo, pero yo he hecho deporte, fui una persona que iba a gimnasio otra vez, y después que va algo que yo no estoy bien. Y me dijo que es muy mal, y tiene que la vida como de discordia y el médico. Digo, joder, porque no tengo ni a puesto y luego por cuando en mi vida, que no llegaba, y se me quedó por un plan, ¿veis? Pues mañana te digo que te vas a ir estás aquí, y vamos a hacer una vez que más de la universidad, vamos a tomar el cristal, en el libro, a final, es tipo, no tengo que ir por no para una vez que una medicación cotidiana, una vez me ha hecho que tengo que rectificar en tu cara, porque para estar en la colegio, para estar en la en su porque de seguridad yo tenía para una persona que va a inversión, lo que quiere decir, he hecho boxeo, he hecho y de la vida si quiere venir, y empecé a encontrarme más actividades. Internet de dos, mi prima tiene 3% bien, la diferencia de que mi universidad es encargado más. Y un poco lo decía cuando por sobre por su capital, por allá, por mil cosas. Así que la ley para así es la ley de los claro, yo cuidado con la vida. Yo voy a echar la alegría, y luego tengo un montón de trabajo de que aquí hasta el poco. Bueno, depende del paso. Y porque yo le cae de todo. Y entonces, y el tiro, cuidado. Claro, he salido, y viene de semana, por todo cada 2 horas, y se lo he dicho al capaz, esta. Y dice, no, porque yo no voy a las 7 y 9. Mira, pero yo hoy, que para probar, he cogido el de antes de las 7. El de antes de las 7. Pero yo decía a las 7 que cualquier, cada día. Y he llegado aquí, que era menos 20 cosas, porque me dije, bueno, 20 cosas, descargando desde allá para acá. Es un cuarto de hora, y he llevado 3 para la gente. Pero he cogido de antes de las 7. Pero claro, si es el fin de semana, no hay. No, no hay que coger un poco casi que no pega. Bueno, creo que tomamos un poco de como te va a ver el fin de semana. Bueno, no, pues yo no te va a ver el fin de semana, pero es igual. Yo te voy a ver el fin de semana. Y te voy a ver el fin de semana, y miren, aquí vamos. Voy a la oficina y hablar. Lo que no puede hacer es mañana. Porque si no hay transporte para venir a una persona que quiera transporte para venir, no se va a dar más. Es un producto para nosotros. Yo no llego y para mí, que me debo dejar. Y luego para ir, que puede ir más tarde, pero aquí más tarde, y me va a llegar a casa y. Bueno, correcto. Es que el día de la vida me parece. días, porque me fui por la rueda. Pero el fin de semana, tío, ¿por qué mal? Básicamente lo que no conseguiría no porque yo quiero vivir, porque pedir por un tráfico. Hay uno que viene esto que para salir a más ya, no tiro. Me han dicho que de la teoría, me han dicho que todos los tipos de la teoría, a que el varón de seguir y luego sigue. Ya, le tomamos de. Muy bien. Va a volver, pero uno. Por eso le dije que los primeros días yo iba hasta las 8 porque yo quiero ver el tema de volver como, ¿sabes? Claro. Pero ya después, pues sí.